Hey everybody, Mike here with Delta Faucet. Now if you're watching this video, I bet you just completed the installation of your Delta EverEdge shower base. Congratulations! We're now ready to move on to installing a matching wall set and finishing up your enclosure. Now, if you haven't installed an EverEdge shower base yet, be sure to check out our separate video that will walk you through those steps first. Now in this video, the shelves on the wall might look a little different than yours at home, but note any differences are purely an aesthetic design feature and won't affect any of the installation steps. Now, when starting any plumbing related project, it's always a good idea to go ahead and shut off the water supply. So be sure to do that before you start the installation. Before we begin, we want to make sure you're watching the right video. Let's confirm a few things. First, take a look at your installation booklet or packaging to confirm what series you selected. Now, this video will cover installing the Delta EverEdge 60x32 shower wall set. If you have a different sized EverEdge wall set, don't worry, we have another video for you. The size will affect your installation, so be sure to double check that label or booklet to make sure you're watching the right video. Now, keep in mind building codes are different everywhere. Also, if there's a task that seems just a little bit beyond your abilities, we definitely recommend contacting a professional for some additional help. You can also make sure you're totally comfortable with all of these steps by reviewing this video fully before diving in. It's also good to know that this is really a two-person job because there are certainly some steps along the way that require an extra set of hands. One thing to note, we'll be using a dual-purpose polymer adhesive and sealant for our install. However, you can make use of construction adhesive labeled Safe for Plastic or an advanced waterproof sealant. Next, let's collect the tools and supplies we may need to complete this installation. Those include a drill, some safety glasses, a caulk gun, adhesive, sealant, a tape measure, a staple gun, some sill plate gasket, a level, a Carpenter square, some shims, a drop cloth, a pencil, a utility knife, a 3/16" drill bit, a bit holder extension, a driver bit, 1¼ inch stainless or zinc-plated truss head screws, 2½ inch construction screws, a hole saw, some lumber, some gloves, and some sawhorses. Okay, if you're ready, we're ready. So let's get started.
We've gone ahead and placed a piece of cardboard down to protect the surface of our shower base. Now the first step is to check that our walls are plumb. So I have a long level here, and you're going to place it against each of the studs in your opening, making sure that they're plumb and that the bubble is in between the lines. And again, you're gonna do this at each stud location in your opening.
Now we also want to make sure that the walls are square in our opening. So to do this, I'm going to use a Carpenter square. I'm going to start one of my back corners towards the bottom, placing the square tight in the corner, making sure that my framing is evenly touching each side of my square. I also want to check the middle and also towards the top of where my wall set will sit. Now I'm going to check the other side as well to confirm that both are looking nice and square. It's important to note that at this point, if there's any last minute adjustments that need to be made to your framing, now's the time to do so because it's going to be one of the last opportunities for you to do that and also will help ensure that the installation progresses smoothly as we move forward. So if everything's looking good, let's go ahead and move on to the next step. Next, we're going to add some blocking to our existing rough framing that will provide just a little additional support. Now, I've gone ahead and added the blocking to my opening here so I can walk you through the steps and also show you what the finished product is going to look like. Now, the location of the blocking is going to be between the middle two stud bays along the back wall here and also in each of the middle stud bays on my side walls. Now, the height is important. I want to make sure that the blocking in my middle stud bays on the back wall is 48 inches off of the bottom plate on the floor. So I've taken my tape measure, put it back behind my shower base, and then you see I made a reference line at 48 inches up. So now I know where the bottom of that blocking needs to be located. Same idea on the side walls, however the height's going to be slightly higher. On these ones it needs to be 50 3/8 of an inch, again off of my bottom plate. Also the material I'm using is 2x4 material along the back wall and the side wall opposite of my mixing valve. But you'll notice on my wall that it has all my rough plumbing in it, I'm using a 1x4 here, which provides just a little bit of additional clearance for all of that plumbing that's going on in that cavity. To hold everything in place, I'm going to use 2½ inch construction screws, and I want to make sure that all of my blocking is not only mounted level, but also perfectly flush with my existing framing. So, keeping all of that in mind, go ahead and cut all of your blocking, get it installed in place, and then come back here, and we'll move on to the next step. Next, we're gonna be adding some door nailers. Now what door nailers are is a little bit of additional framing that we're gonna be applying to the backside of our existing framing, which will give us a spot to secure our shower doors to if we decide to add them down the road. Now, if you're not planning on adding shower doors to your opening, technically you could skip this step, but I do wanna say that I definitely recommend going ahead and adding them either way to make sure you future-proof your installation. That way, if down the road you do decide you wanna add a shower door, you're totally covered. So, there's some important measurements to remember with these door nailers. The first is that we wanna make sure that they're 69.5 inches tall. Now, for the material, you can use 2x6 or 2x4 material for this, but I definitely recommend using 2x6 material because it gives us just a little bit of extra surface area to attach that door nailer to our existing framing. Next, we wanna make sure that the door nailer is offset from the existing framing by 2 3/16 of an inch. So, you can see I made a little mark at the bottom and a little mark at the top here at that dimension, 2 3/16 of an inch. Lastly, when we apply this to the backside of our existing framing here, I wanna make sure that my door nailer sits 5/8 of an inch above the flange of my shower base. So again, I made a little reference line at the bottom here, but you'll also notice that in an earlier step I was installing my shower base, I had to cut a little bit of additional blocking, so I made sure to cut it at that dimension as well. Now, to secure these to your existing framing, I think it's best to start at the bottom. That way I can keep an eye on both those dimensions, not only the 5/8 of an inch, but also my 2 3/16 of an inch reveal, making sure those look good, and then I'll secure the bottom in place using another 2.5 inch construction screw. Once that's in, I'm gonna move my way to the top, keep an eye on my top line here, again making sure the reveal is at 2 3/16 of an inch, and then secure the top with another 2.5 inch construction screw. That way I can be confident that I have a good, even reveal all the way from the top to the bottom. Once that first piece is in, I'm gonna take my second piece, apply it directly to the back of the first piece, making sure it's exactly the same height and also flush with the first one. And once that's in, I'm gonna repeat the same exact steps on the other side, and then we'll be ready to move on.
Now it's time to dry fit our panels in place. So we're gonna start with our back panel. We're gonna center it in the opening and set it down on the deck of our shower base. Okay, Mike's gonna hold that in place. And I'm gonna grab our side panel. And I know that this is the correct side panel because after I get it snapped in, my flange will be facing the outside. All right, so I'm gonna apply some pressure and you'll hear it snap in. Okay.
All right, so now we're gonna move on to our mixing valve side. Now, before I do that, I'll point out that you see I've removed my test cap and my bonnet nut to give myself just a little bit more leeway when dry fitting this panel. However, be aware that during the dry fit process, the side panel on the mixing valve side will never fully contact my framing because that mixing valve is always gonna hold it off the wall just a little bit. So, similar to the other side, I'm gonna grab my panel, fit that back channel into the side panel until I feel it snap together. And now we have all 3 panels dry fit into our opening. Now we're gonna check for some alignment. I wanna make sure that the front of my side panel is even with the front of my shower base. And then also I'm gonna check my corners to make sure everything looks nice and tight. I also think it's a good idea to just go ahead and check the top of my panels as well, checking the back corners, making sure I'm getting good, even alignment all the way around.
All right, once you've checked your alignment, we're gonna make some reference marks. So grab a pencil, and you're gonna draw a line at the top of the flange of each of your panels at each of your stud locations in your opening. So go ahead and make those marks. You're also going to make a reference mark for our pilot holes that we'll be drilling later. So again, at each one of our stud locations, you're gonna make a little mark in the center of your flange.
While Hannah's doing that, we also want to be adding 6 pilot hole locations down the front flange on each side panel. So I'm gonna make a mark towards the top, towards the bottom, and then evenly space the remaining 4. Once that's all done, we're gonna pull the panels back out of our opening and move on to the next step of drilling our pilot holes. Next, we need to determine the center point of the hole that we need to cut in our side panel to accommodate our mixing valve. So to do this, we're gonna be taking 2 measurements. The first is a vertical measurement, the distance from the shower base up to the center of the mixing valve. And the second is gonna be a horizontal measurement, the distance from a line that's plumb with the front of my shower base across to the center of my mixing valve.
The intersection of those two measurements will determine the center point of the hole that I need to drill in my side panel to, again, accommodate this mixing valve. So the first measurement we're going to take is the vertical measurement. I'm going to use my tape measure, making sure it's contacting the deck of my shower base, and then making note of the measurement to the center of my mixing valve. Okay, great. So next we're going to take our horizontal measurement. And again, we want to make sure we're measuring off a line that's plumb from the front of my shower base to the center of the mixing valve. So I like to use my long level and hold it tight against my shower base at the bottom, and then keep an eye on the bubble to make sure I'm plumb, and then make note of that measurement to the center of the mixing valve. Okay, great. So now that I have my horizontal and vertical measurements, I can transfer those to my side panel, and I know the center point of that hole that I need to cut. However, I can't stress this enough, we're gonna get one shot at getting this hole correct. So I think it's a great idea to do a test run using a cardboard template to make sure that we've got all our measurements exactly where we want them. So here's my cardboard template here. And I wanna talk through this just for a second. Now, the important thing about our cardboard template is you'll notice the first thing I've done is put a big arrow on the front so I know which way is supposed to face me and which way is up. Second, I wanted to make sure that my bottom edge and my leading edge of the template are both perfectly straight and also at a right angle to one another. You'll also notice down at the bottom here that I've made a little tiny notch, and the reason for that is to fit over the little lip on the front edge of the shower base there. So, once you have your cardboard template ready to go, I'm going to go ahead and transfer my vertical and my horizontal measurements to this, cut my test hole for the mixing valve, then we'll come back here and test fit it just to make sure every measurement is perfect before cutting the side panel for real. So, go ahead and do that, then we'll come back here and move on. To transfer those measurements over to our cardboard template, I'm going to start by using my vertical measurement off the bottom of my template. Transferring that on there. And then my horizontal measurement off of the front of my template. Right there. And so now what that's given me is the center point of the hole that I need to cut for my mixing valve. Now the size of the hole is important too. I want to make sure I'm cutting a hole that's large enough to accommodate my mixing valve, but not so large that whatever finish trim I'm selecting won't cover that hole fully. So just keep that in mind. All right, once you're comfortable with your measurements, let's go ahead and cut that test hole, then we'll come back here and fit our template into place. All right, so we have the hole cut in our templates. Now we can test fit it one last time to see how we've done. So I'm gonna take my template with the arrow facing me and pointing up, and I wanna make sure that the bottom of the base is sitting evenly along the deck of my shower base, and then also that the leading edge is perfectly in line with the front of my shower base. Once that's there, I'm gonna check the location and the size of the hole, and everything is looking great with my template. So at this point, if you had some final adjustment to make, you'd want to make note of that. But if everything's looking good, we can now confidently transfer those same measurements over to my side panel before cutting our final hole. So let's go ahead and move on.
All right, we've got our side panel out and up on sawhorses because we're about to drill the hole for our mixing valve. Now it's very important that you ensure you have the correct side panel and that it's in the correct orientation. So you want to make sure it's facing up. And I know that this is the bottom because it's the shorter side with no flange on it. So we're going to transfer our measurements to our side panel. So this is where it's really helpful to have two people, and I'll show you why. So grab your tape measure. You can see we have a lip here on our side panel. So when I pull my tape across, I want to set it on the opposite lip so that it's level. So it's helpful to have two people because he can get a bird's eye view when he transfers that measurement.
Yeah, it's important to note that we're not going to be able to take our tape measure and hold it flat to the panel just because of the way it's contoured. So you want to make sure that the tape measure is staying perfectly level. Get your eye directly above the measurement you need to transfer to the panel below, and then go ahead and make that mark.
Now we'll get the horizontal measurement transferred.
Just like the vertical, again, we want to make sure that the tape measure is staying perfectly level. Get your eye up above, directly over the top of it, and transfer it to the panel down below. Okay, perfect. Now that we have that intersection mark, that determines the center point of the hole that we're going to drill for our mixing valve. Now, for our installation here, I'm going to be drilling a 4-inch hole. However, make sure you use the appropriate size for whatever mixing valve that you're installing. Now, the other thing I want to point out is, as we drill this, it's very important to make sure that we're going to get this perfectly centered because, again, we're only going to get one shot at this. So it could be helpful to drill a small pilot hole, which could help make sure that your drill stays perfectly centered as you drill that hole. However, the other option is to just go very slow and be very careful because we don't want this drill to walk around it as we're drilling that hole. So once everything looks good and you're confident in your center point, let's go ahead and get that hole drilled.
Okay, now it's time to drill our pilot holes. I have a 3/16 inch drill bit and an extended bit holder. That's to make sure that the spinning chuck of my drill won't damage my wall panel. All right, so go ahead and drill those pilot holes on all 3 of our wall panels. We'll be ready to move on to the next step.
Moving right along, the next step is to add this fire retardant pad to the backside of the mixing valve hole that we just cut. So I've turned my panel around so the backside is facing out, and I'm going to be placing this pad as evenly as possible over the hole. Now on the backside of the pad, I've got 2 different sides of adhesive. I find it's easiest to go ahead and remove one side, kind of keep it folded over, press it down, and then remove the other side and finish folding my pad over that hole. That way I can be sure I'm keeping it centered. Once the pad's on there, I'm going to use the utility knife, cutting an X, and then also around the circle so I can remove all of that pad and make sure that hole is clear. Now when I do this, I want to be very careful to make sure that I'm not damaging the panel or going to cut myself, so just keep an eye on that. If everything's looking good, let's go ahead and get it done. I'm going to remove one side of my pad, kind of fold it over a little bit, make sure I'm staying centered. Cutting an X in the middle of the pad, across my opening, and then I can cut out the rest of the material around the circle, being very careful not to cut myself. Okay, now that we've got that all cut, we can move on.
Next, we're ready to apply our foam tape to the flange of our shower base. Now the foam tape itself will have an adhesive side that's currently covered by paper. We're going to make sure we're sticking the adhesive to the flange of the shower base. And the position of the tape is going to be important. We want to make sure that it starts just inside the dam or this front lip of the shower base and also is located along the flat of the flange towards the top, just underneath where that top curve starts. So when you're ready, we can go ahead and peel off a little bit of the paper. And then make sure we're starting the tape in the right location. It's okay if you cover the screw. And then peel off a little more tape and work your way around the opening, keeping that position of the foam tape consistent and making sure you're getting good even contact as you move along. Now when it comes to the corners, we also want to make sure we're getting the foam tape all the way back in the corner, so I like to take my finger, just make sure that I'm getting good adhesion even all the way back inside the corner there. Okay, I'm going to continue applying the tape the rest of the way around the shower base. All right, now as we get towards the end, we want this tape to end at the same location that we started on the other side, just inside that front lip or that front dam of the shower base. So if you have a little bit of extra, that's okay. You can use some scissors or utility knife to cut it. We just want to be careful that we don't damage the shower base in any way when we do so. Okay, that's looking great. Now I think it's a good idea to go back around one last time just to check for 3 things. We want to make sure that we've got it in the right position, that we have full adhesion against the flange, and also that in our back corners, we've pushed the tape all the way back in there with no gaps. Once that's done, you're ready to move on to the next step. Next, we're going to add some sill plate gasket to our back wall framing to help with some noise reduction. Now the sill plate gasket isn't included in your installation materials, so you'll have to purchase it. I'm going to be holding it in place using a staple gun. Now the position we're going to be putting this in is along the middle 3 studs on our back wall, as well as the horizontal bracing that we added earlier. I'm going to locate it 4 inches down from the top reference line that we marked during our dry fit phase and run it all the way down each stud, stopping 2 inches above the flange of our shower base. So once you have the sill plate gasket ready to go, we're going to go ahead and put this in. Now we're going to move on to applying some adhesive to our back wall framing. Now you can use an adhesive that's safe for plastic or an advanced polymer sealant. We're going to be applying the adhesive to a similar location that we did with the sill plate gasket, starting 4 inches down from our top reference line in each corner, but this time we're going to extend our bead of adhesive all the way to the top flange of our shower base. I'm also going to make sure I add a bead of adhesive underneath each one of those 2-inch gaps I left between the sill plate gasket and the shower flange. Now the size of the bead is also important. I want to make sure that the bead of adhesive is double the thickness of our sill plate gasket here, so keep that in mind as you work your way around the opening. Okay, if you're ready, let's get to it.
Now it's time to secure our back panel. So we're gonna pick it up, move it into the opening, centering it. We're gonna place it down onto the deck of our shower base. We're gonna make sure that we're lined up with those reference marks that we made earlier. And also we have even contact on the bottom. Okay, that looks good.
All right, with everything looking good, now we can go ahead and screw it into place through those pilot holes that we drilled in the previous step. So the screws I'm going to be using are 1.25 inches long, and they're truss head or pan head screws. And as you're doing this, I want to make sure that my flange is making good contact with the wood framing behind it. If I have any large gaps of greater than 1/8 of an inch, I definitely want to drop a shim down between the wood framing and the flange to close that gap before inserting the screw. Also, when I'm tightening these screws up, I want to make sure they just need to be snug and that I'm not over tightening them, because if I tighten them up too much, it could cause some damage to the flange. And finally, with the drill I'm going to be using, I'm going to have an extended drill bit holder on it to give myself a little bit more leeway, because I want to make sure that the spinning chuck of the drill isn't going to contact my wall set and potentially cause some damage. So, if everything's looking good, let's go ahead and secure it in place.
Now that we have our back panel in place, we can move on to our side walls. Now we're going to prep them in a similar fashion to what we did for our back wall, but there are a couple minor differences. The first is we're applying sill plate gasket again, and we're going to apply it to the middle 2 studs in each side wall, but not any additional blocking. Also, again, we're going to start at 4 inches down from the top line like before, but this time we're going to run the sill plate gasket all the way down to the top of the shower base flange. So let's go ahead and repeat the same steps for both sides. Now for this next step, if you're not planning on installing a shower door, technically you could skip it. However, I think it's a great idea to go ahead and do it either way to help future-proof your installation. That way, if down the road you decide you want to add that shower door after all, you're totally covered. What we're doing is adding an L-shaped bead of sealant, starting on our shower base. We're going to start at the top of the flange, extend out along the very top of the dam 2 inches, and then turn and move inside our shower base for 3 inches. So, we're going to start at the top of the shower flange here, out along the very top of the base, and then turn and bring it inside. Now I'm going to do the same bead of sealant on the other side, and then we'll be ready to move on.
Next, we can move on to installing our side panels. Now I'm going to fit the side panel into the back panel just like I did during the dry fit phase, snapping my back corners together. Once you feel it snap together, we can now check for alignment. I'm going to be checking the front edge of my side panel here, making sure it's even with the front edge of my shower base. I'm also going to keep an eye along the shower base and the wall panel, making sure I'm getting good consistent contact along the bottom, and then also up in the corner. I'm going to secure my side panel to my framing through each one of the top holes that I drilled earlier, and also down along the front flange here. Once that's complete, I can do the same exact steps for the other side. I'll be ready to move on. Okay, so finish screwing in the rest of your panels and score and snap off any shims that you may have used. Also, let the adhesive cure according to the manufacturer's instructions. Once that's done, it about wraps things up. Now the final step of this installation comes after your finished walls are in, like mine are here. You'll need to apply a bead of sealant to all of the outer edges of your wall set. Now the great thing about this wall set is that you won't have to apply any sealant to the interior seams. Also, there are a lot of different options on how to finish up the project, but you're probably gonna wanna add a shower door or a shower curtain. All right, this looks great. Now we hope our video was helpful and you're as happy with your finished project as we are with ours. Now, as always, if you have any additional questions, feel free to reach out to the Delta Faucet customer service team. They're more than happy to help.